grace and light.
Tear away every illusion. That child newly born set in motion a blood-soaked massacre. How could a hunted refugee fleeing for his life bring down the might of the Roman Empire? The truth that history buried awaits you at the very end. Forget the gentle lullabies whispered beside a cradle. Forget the polished Christmas cards that depict a silent winter night, glowing softly beneath peaceful stars. The history of this world has never been written in velvet peace. It was forged in the violent heart of brutality, in the madness of political ambition, and in lands saturated with the stench of death. To truly grasp the magnitude of the Messiah's arrival, we must shatter forever the comforting illusion that the Holy Scriptures are merely a collection of soothing spiritual allegories. No. They are a raw, unflinching map, stained with blood, of one of the most earth-shattering revolutions in human history. A moment when the boundaries of power and life itself were pushed to their very limits. Moment to subscribe, for your support fuels the mission to uncover truth like this. Now, fix your eyes upon the map of the first century. The Roman Empire was not merely powerful. It was a monstrous force, stretching its ruthless dominion from the rain-drenched shores of Britannia to the burning sands of Syria. It was built upon shattered bones and held together by the unyielding discipline of Roman legions. What they called Pax Romana, the peace of Rome, was not peace at all. It was terror. Step out of line even slightly, and Rome would not simply take your life. They would crucify you, turning your slow and agonizing death into a grotesque public spectacle along the empire's roads, a declaration that their power could never be challenged. At the volatile edge of this empire lay Judea, a land simmering like a powder keg, fueled by religious zeal and suppressed fury. And ruling over this fragile territory was Herod the Great, a king in title, but a puppet in truth. To the world, Herod was a brilliant architect, a master builder of cities and temples. But beneath the surface, he was a man consumed by paranoia, a tyrant devoured by fear. He executed his own wife. He ordered the deaths of his own sons. He trusted no one. Each night, he slept with one eye open, his hand gripping a throne he knew was never truly his. Now narrow your vision. Focus on a place so small it seemed almost meaningless. Bethlehem. In 5 BC, it was not a peaceful refuge. It was chaos. Caesar Augustus had issued a decree, a census designed to count every soul, extract every coin, and tighten Rome's grip upon its people. The roads were clogged with exhausted travelers forced to return to their ancestral homes. And among them, a young woman, heavy with child, struggled forward beside her weary fiancé, Joseph, after a brutal journey of nearly 90 miles. When the Messiah was born, it did not happen in comfort. There were no soft linens, no golden chambers. It happened in darkness, inside a damp limestone cave, thick with the stench of animals and decay. Yet that cry was not quiet. It was seismic, a disturbance, a shockwave that rippled through the unseen fabric of power. When the Magi from the east, men of knowledge, influence, and royal discernment, arrived in Jerusalem asking, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews?" They did not merely seek a child. They ignited a crisis, a spark thrown into Herod's volatile kingdom. And the tyrant's response was not worship. It was annihilation. He ordered the execution of every male child under 2 years old in Bethlehem. This was no ordinary act of violence. It was calculated, cold, strategic, a localized genocide designed to eliminate a single perceived threat. The cries of grieving mothers echoed against the stone hills of Judea, their sorrow mingling with the blood of the innocent. This was the true beginning of the Messiah's story. Why? Why would the creator of the universe, the King of all kings, enter human history not as a conquering general, but but as the most vulnerable being on earth. A hunted child, a refugee. The answer begins in flight. A warning came in a dream, cutting through the darkness of night. Joseph rose without hesitation, and the family fled southward. This was not a journey. It was a desperate escape, across barren deserts, across unforgiving terrain, toward Egypt. They crossed the Sinai wilderness, where burning days and freezing nights clashed violently, and danger lurked in every shadow. Bandits, wild beasts, uncertainty at every step. They became what history often forgets, refugees, stripped of security, driven by fear, hunted by power. The King of Kings began his earthly life not in triumph, but in exile. Dust clung to his feet. Hardship marked his path, and in that moment, he aligned himself completely with the broken, the rejected, the hunted, and the forgotten of this world. He did not come to rule from a distance. He came to dwell among suffering, to walk within it, to redeem it. Even as the sands of Egypt faded behind them, the life of a child once marked as a refugee was never destined for ease. When Herod the Great finally drew his last breath, a death consumed by disease, paranoia, and the curses of his own people, the small family returned. But they did not return to glory. They did not return to Bethlehem, nor to the powerful courts of Jerusalem. Instead, they withdrew into obscurity, settling in Nazareth, a poor and forgotten village hidden in the hills of Galilee. It is easy to be misled by gentle images of a joyful childhood, of a boy laughing beneath open skies. But the truth was far harsher. Galilee in those days was not a place of peace. It was a breeding ground for rebellion. This was the land of the zealots, men who concealed daggers beneath their cloaks, ready at any moment to strike down Roman soldiers. The air itself was thick with tension. It carried the scent of sweat from laborers, the sharp bitterness of sawdust from humble workshops, and the quiet, burning rage of a people living under oppression. Here, in this fragile and volatile world, the young Jesus grew. He did not grow up in temples. He did not dwell among scholars or kings. He lived among the poor. He witnessed farmers crushed under relentless taxation. He saw families lose everything, even their children, to debt and slavery. For 30 years, the King of the universe chose silence. 30 years of hidden life, of calloused hands, of quiet endurance. He labored as a carpenter, shaping wood beneath the weight of ordinary life. But beneath that silence, something was being forged. Not weakness, but purpose. Not retreat, but preparation. And then the silence shattered. Not by a decree from Rome, not by the voice of kings, but by a cry rising from the wilderness. John the Baptist. Do not imagine him as a gentle preacher. He was wild. A man clothed in rough camel's hair, feeding on locusts and wild honey, standing at the edge of civilization and hurling judgment like fire into the faces of the religious elite. His voice was not soft, it was thunder, a call to repentance that shook the very foundations of religious power. And then Jesus came to him, stepping down into the muddy waters of the Jordan River. This was no ordinary ritual. This was no symbolic cleansing. It was a moment that echoed beyond time itself. As he rose from the water, the heavens opened, not to crown him with earthly glory, but to mark the beginning of war. A war not of swords, but of truth. Not of armies, but of souls. And immediately he was driven into the wilderness. Not led into comfort, not guided into safety, but thrust into desolation. 40 days, 40 nights, no food, no shelter, only silence and hunger. A place where the body breaks and the mind is stripped bare. This was no retreat, it was a battlefield. And when the hunger reached its peak, when the body stood at the edge of collapse, the enemy came. Not as a monster, not with horns or flames, but as something far more dangerous. A negotiator, a master of power. The first temptation came quietly. Turn these stones into bread. Feed yourself, satisfy your need, but beneath it lay something deeper. Use power to control. Use miracles to win the crowd. Jesus refused. The second temptation rose higher. Throw yourself down from the temple. Force God to act. Create a spectacle. Earn belief through display. But again, he refused. Then came the final offer, the most dangerous of all. A vision of kingdoms, of power, of dominion. All this can be yours if you bow. No suffering, no cross, just authority, instantly. This was not temptation, it was strategy, a shortcut to rule the world. But Jesus saw through it. He refused to build his kingdom on manipulation, on spectacle, or on compromise with evil. He chose the harder path, the path of sacrifice, the path of the cross. And with that, the battle was decided. He did not leave the wilderness victorious in appearance. He left exhausted, worn, scarred, but unbroken. His body weakened, but his will sharper than a blade forged in fire. Something had changed. The silence was over. The hidden years had come to an end. The king had stepped forward. Not with armies, not with weapons, but with truth that would shake empires. And from that moment on, nothing in history would ever be the same again. Emerging from the silence of the wilderness, he did not walk into palaces of marble, nor halls of power. Instead, he stepped directly into the broken places of the world. The darkest corners, the forgotten streets, the lives no one else would touch. The ministry of Jesus was not a series of gentle teachings designed to comfort the masses. It was a revolution. A direct assault on the very foundations of power, religion, and human pride. Look carefully at those he chose to stand beside him. Not scholars, not kings, not priests. Fishermen, rough, unrefined, smelling of sweat and salt water. Men without status, without influence. And then he chose Matthew, a tax collector, a man despised by his own people, a servant of Rome, a traitor in the eyes of the nation. And Simon, a zealot, a man once driven by violence, ready to overthrow power through bloodshed. Enemies brought into the same circle. This was no accident. It was a declaration. The kingdom he was building would not follow the logic of this world. And what followed shook everything. In the first century, disease was not merely physical. It was spiritual condemnation. To be sick was to be cursed. To be a leper was to be erased from humanity. They were cast out, forced to live in isolation. If anyone came near, they had to cry out, unclean. A warning, a sentence, a life of living death. But then he came, and he did the unthinkable. He touched them, not from a distance, not through ritual, but with his own hands. The crowd recoiled, but in that moment, something deeper than flesh was healed. Not just disease, but dignity. The invisible became seen. The rejected became restored. And it didn't stop there. He sat at tables with those society despised, prostitutes, beggars, outcasts. He did not avoid them. He ate with them, laughed with them, restored them. And in doing so, he shattered a system that had long defined people by their worth, their purity, their status. He lifted women in a culture that silenced them. He embraced children in a world that dismissed them. Every miracle was not just power. It was protest. Every blind eye opened, every crippled leg restored, was a blow against a system built on control. And the religious leaders, they saw it, they felt it, and they feared it, because they had turned faith into a system of profit, a structure designed to maintain power. Rules were not made to guide, they were made to control. And now, that control was slipping. Then came the Sermon on the Mount. Not as gentle poetry, but as a manifesto, a declaration of a new kingdom. Blessed are the poor, blessed are those who mourn, blessed are the peacemakers. These were not comforting words, they were disruptive, they inverted everything. In this kingdom, the first would be last, the greatest would serve. Power would come through humility, and love, even for enemies, would become the greatest force the world had ever known. This was not philosophy. It was war. A war against pride, against power, against the illusion that strength comes from domination. And then he did something unforgivable in the eyes of the powerful. He forgave sins, not symbolically, not indirectly, but with authority, directly, publicly. And in doing so, he bypassed the entire religious system. No temple, no sacrifice, no payment, just grace, freely given. This was not just dangerous, it was catastrophic to the existing order, because forgiveness was their currency, and he had just made it free. From that moment on, he was no longer just a teacher. He became a threat to Rome, to religion, to power itself. The crowds followed him, thousands, drawn not by force, but by something deeper, truth, hope, freedom. And from the high places they watched, Roman officials with suspicion, religious leaders with growing hatred. Plans were made, whispers turned into strategies, accusations sharpened like blades in the dark. Because they knew, if he continued, everything would fall. And so the net began to tighten, slowly, quietly, inevitably. The revolution had begun, but so had the resistance. And the collision was coming. The light of this inverted kingdom could not remain hidden in the margins of Galilee. It had to move inevitably toward the center of power, Jerusalem, the city where faith, politics, and authority collided. And the timing was no accident. It was Passover, the very moment when the memory of liberation burned brightest in the hearts of the people. But this was not merely a religious gathering. It was a powder keg. Rome knew it. That is why from the western gate, Roman governors entered the city with calculated intimidation, riding towering war horses, followed by heavily armed legions, their armor gleaming beneath the sun. A display of force, a warning, a reminder that rebellion would be crushed. But from the east, another procession emerged, not with war horses, but with a donkey, small, humble, unthreatening, and yet far more dangerous. Jesus entered Jerusalem not as a conqueror, but as a contradiction. The crowd surged around him, waving palm branches, shouting, "Hosanna!" Two processions, two kingdoms, two visions of power, and they collided in that moment. Rome offered domination. Jesus offered surrender. Rome ruled by fear. Jesus ruled by love. And Jerusalem stood in the middle. Then he made his move. Not toward the palace, not toward political power, but toward the temple, the heart of religious authority. The life of Jesus was never meant to be a quiet story. It was a collision between love and power, between humility and domination, between truth and illusion. And in the end, it was not power that won. It was love. Not violence, but sacrifice. Not control, but surrender. And that truth still stands today. In a world driven by competition, pressure, and fear, the question remains, can love still overcome hatred? Can forgiveness still break chains? Or have we forgotten what true power really is? If this message has stirred something within you, then this is not the end. It is an invitation to reflect, to awaken, and to rediscover a truth that changed the world and still can.
If this message has stirred something within you, if you feel that quiet fire beginning to rise, then subscribe to Grace and Light. Because this is more than content. This is a journey, a return to a faith that is real, alive, and unstoppable.